Howard Schultz sat in his New York office, baffled that a young upstart company out of Seattle was ordering a certain kind of drip coffee maker, the kind that had a plastic funnel attached on top of a thermos. The year was 1981, and this young company was buying more of them than Macy's. Howard Schultz was his company's largest and best-selling salesman out of the New York office. He worked for a franchise that excelled in home goods, and he thought he knew his customer base better than anybody. So what was it about this company that allured him? Armed with curiosity and a plane ticket, he flew in 1981 from New York to Seattle and sat down with the owners of this small company for dinner. And by his own account, when he got up from that dinner, his life was changed. He flew back to New York and within a week called the owners back and begged them for a job. When they finally acquiesced, Howard Schultz left his Fortune 500 company and moved to Seattle. 5 years later, he bought the company. Perhaps you've heard it. It's called Starbucks, and it isn't small anymore. Howard Schultz, in his own book, as a testimony, said there was one thing that persuaded him to give up his life in New York, a solid career, and begin with this small company, taking it to where it is, leading the world to put, as of this year, the coffee business to be a $38 billion business. And Starbucks, wherever you think about them, has led the way to do that. Howard Schultz said there was one and only one reason he made this move. One word: passion. He said when he met with the owners and later the employees, their enthusiasm was so infectious about coffee, he had to be a part of it. In the early 80s, when most Americans were drinking sawdust called Folgers and Maxwell House, the good people of Starbucks were flying all over the world, finding exotic coffee beans from all different countries, smelling the aroma, blending them to precise proportions. In a word, they were passionate about coffee, and slowly but surely have redefined how Americans think and drink about coffee. If I were a betting man, I would bet that 20% of you, before you walked in here, had a Starbucks. From this pulpit, within 5 minutes, I can take you to 4 different Starbucks. From this pulpit, within 5 minutes, I can take you to 10 different coffee houses, made possible by Starbucks. Passion. Infectious enthusiasm. If there is one word that could describe the Almighty, it would not be boring. No one is in heaven right now looking at their phone saying, when will this end? No one is in heaven yawning, saying, what's next? So our God is consumed by an unrelenting, boundless passion for His glory. If there is one thing that the church has neglected, and in many parts of our country is still neglecting, it is something that God doesn't neglect. God will have no other gods before him. He is on a passionate pursuit, a fiery, consummate desire that he get the glory. And that is what the Ten Commandments are built upon. And so we come to the second today. Curiously, is the longest one, but it is built around the first. We could say it really is because of the first and this command not to have any other gods before them that we get the second. Now, in verse 2, we begin, just by way of reminder, with the preamble, and it begins with this patented I am from God. God, by using the I ams of the Bible, is letting you get to know him like a friend that enjoys a coffee. I am this, I am that. And you get up from the chair and you know a little bit about your friend. We do this all the time. For example, I am a night owl, not a morning person. People who tell me, get up at 5, you'll feel better. I get a headache by 5:30. Okay, I would rather stay up till 4 a.m. and just work through the next day. I am a night owl, not a morning person. I am a basketball fan, not a soccer fan. I am a coffee drinker, not a cold, fruity tea drinker. I am a rock and roll lover, not a rap connoisseur. I am a gardener, not a musician. I am a historian, not a mathematician. I am a Ralph Lauren junkie, not an Old Navy customer. I am a collector of English, French, Italian cookbooks, not vegan, never vegan. Now, in those 20 seconds, you have learned a lot about me with the I ams. God equally, in the scriptures, will say, I am this, so that you get to know him. And right out of the gate of the Ten Commandments, he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. I am your Redeemer. No other deity can say that. What other gods can redeem you? I saved, I rescued you out of the land of Egypt, and I put you where you belong. And in that same style, we have verse 5, that declares God by saying, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. That's the second thing he wants Israel to learn. Remember, he's recently redeemed them. They've been in 430 years of slavery. God's come to earth, taken them out of, and so these are introductions. I am your Redeemer. No one else will redeem you. And I am a jealous God. Now that's curious that he would say that, isn't it? Israel, I'm freeing you. You once were slaves. I'm emancipating you. I'm redeeming you like no other. And I am entering into a covenantal, almost a marital type love. And I am going to love you. And I am on a consummate passion to love you like all others. And I'm asking you to love me back because no other deity will love you back the way I do. Oh, and by the way, I am unapologetically, bulldogishly, like a vice grip, jealous for your love. Kind of sounds like, if we don't know any better, like a crazed ex-girlfriend named Sybil. I mean, when we hear jealousy, we think negative, right? People have jealous siblings, jealous soccer moms, jealous co-workers, that is driven by a self-serving anger. And so when we hear God is a jealous God, we bristle. But jealousy actually can demonstrate deep love and affection, can it? Think of a young mother so jealous for her children, she will lay down her life to protect her little cubs. Think of a husband so jealously in love with his wife that he will defend her honor and virtue at all costs. And God is telling Israel, and the order is deliberate. Infinitely more am I in passionate love with you, Israel, that I and I alone rescued you. No deity has done that. And I am going to love you unlike any other deity. And guess what? I am so in love with you, I'm not going to share you with anybody else. That's how jealous I am. And I ask you to reciprocate that love. Let's enter into a marital bond, a covenantal bond, where it's just you and me. I'm asking you to be monogamous. And I'm going to tell you how much I hate idols and what I do to people who worship them, which I'm getting ahead of myself. So we could ask then, just how jealous is God for his redeemed people? We could answer that in the next line. How jealous is God? How much is he in love with his people who he's just redeemed? So in love, so passionate, so jealous, he threatens them if they abandon his love. What's the next line in verse 5? I will respond to the transgression of fathers by dealing not only with them, but with their children to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me. And to balance the fire, balance the passion, now to those who are faithful, I will bless in that same third and fourth generation. Now this is a lunch discussion, possibly a 2-latte discussion. What does this mean? And there are all sorts of interpretations. This is not the time to talk about all of them, but some would say, well, this is literal to 3 and 4 generations, and others, like me, would say, no, it's not to be taken literally. Others would say, well, this is problematic. Is this unconditional punishment? You know, we do, after all, read in other sections of Scripture where God will not hold children responsible for their father's evil, and that is true. What I think is meant here is to let us know, as God's people, the long-term effects in a relationship with the Redeemer has on our proper worship or our improper worship of him, which tells us again how passionate he is to be worshiped properly. Let me say it this way. Right worship will always have long-term vibrancy and health on a community of believers, and the opposite is true. So in all practical purposes, there is no accident that you can go to some churches that have minimal problems, not perfect, no church is, and other churches that have perennial problems. That is not an accident. Why some churches are healthy and some aren't. And I will tell you why that is, at least in part. So if you're here visiting, the advice I give in my Membership Matters class on choosing a church is to go to any church, Calvary, the church down the road, and sit there and observe and ask yourself, and this is the most important question, not the question, what does the children's ministry look like? I mean, that's a good question. Or what is the, size of the building? Or what is the style of the music? Those are down the line. They always have been. And it is wrong of us, it is naive or immature of us to flip it and make that the main thing when the history of the church has never made that the main thing. But the real question you can ask is, what does this community of believers say about God? How do they talk about him? How is he sung about or sung to? How is he preached? How is he prayed? Is his word the driving force? When people leave, do they talk about them? Do they rightfully have God in their place? And if they do, it's not an accident. It comes as a blessing from God onto that people of God with long health, vibrancy. Well, that's my side here. So the question I want to ask is, what set off this announcement and testimonial that I am the jealous God, I threaten people who won't obey me, and I will honor those who do? What set it off is the second commandment that begins in verse 4. That is the prohibition of the worship of idols. Now, what is an idol, you might ask? Well, according to your text, if you're looking at it in verse 4, an idol is described as something that you make an image or a likeness of, later on, verse 5, to bow down and serve it, to worship it. By definition, that is an idol. Now, let me be very clear here. So we remain friends. An idol is not simply or merely an image or likeness you make. That is not prohibited in this command. In fact, we have examples where God uses the man-made crafting of images and likeness for worship. So, we have the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, several times in their life, constructing statues and monuments of stone to honor moments in their life where God answered their prayer. And they come back to it and they say, remember when God at this memorial did this for us. That's an image. And God told them to build it. When the people of God build the tabernacle and build the temple, there will be images of angel, the cherubim over the Ark of the Covenant. There will be images of humans and of animals on the curtains of the tabernacle and the temple. God instructed them to put it there. When you read in Revelation, you'll read about all sorts of beasts and images around the throne of God. So, images and likenesses that are man-made is not a violation of the commandment. We're not disobeying God because we have a symbol, an image of the cross on Christian houses of worship. That is not what the violation or prohibition of the command is. And I'll give you, the violation is using those and worshiping them rather than using them as a conduit of worship. One such example is the Ark of the Covenant. An image made by man with specific art from nature, specifications from God to be used in a holy way to emanate His presence, right? You touch it, you die. And we've all seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. That is okay. That doesn't violate the command. That was an image made by man, specific for worship. But we do see in 1 Samuel 4 how it was the same image used for idolatry. This is in a battle when Israel brings it out against the Philistines and they're losing and they say, bring out the Ark of the Covenant because then God is compelled to beat the Philistines because we brought the Ark out. So you see what they're doing. They're using the Ark as sort of a rabbit foot theology. They're using the Ark as sort of a weapon in the tool. And there they have defaced it. They lose the battle. God isn't with them. The ark is captured. So the prohibition, it's very clear, so you don't go home and burn your art pictures. That the prohibition of the second commandment is not a man-made design, either in art or in nature, of an image or likeness. The prohibition, as the text says, is a man-made image or likeness that you worship and serve. That's the violation. That, by definition, is an idol. And God is very passionate. I don't negotiate with idols. So passionate that we have this superlative description, don't we? Don't worship a carved image that is in heaven, that is on earth, that is under the earth. No idols, nowhere, no how, no exceptions, period. Now, putting these verses together, why should we not worship idols? Of course, the quick answer is, well, God told us not to. Obedience. That is true. But there's another one if we double back where I started a few moments ago. And the answer is given to us here by God. Why in your life? And the tragedy is our idols are not named. They're just seen. I mentioned a few last week. Our idols that compete for our affections and love are in the form of sports, materialism, career, influence, relationships, sex, medicine, science, advancement, and on and on. Anything that is man-made created does not have the power to redeem, that's God's identifying point. Has the potential to be an idol. Why shouldn't we worship them? The answer is because the Lord your God is a jealous God. He will not share you with anyone else. And when we worship idols, we are, what does the word say here in verse 5? We are rejecting that Redeemer's love for something else and something less. So herein lies the danger of idols. In the time I have remaining, I would like to quickly put two principles before you as you and I fight our idols in this world, and they are many. Number one, this is advice from your pastor. Idols will never be jealous for your love like our gods will, because idols, by definition, have been fabricated. You want to worship an idol, you might as well go up to Manitoba and search for Bigfoot. Idols, by definition, are man-made. And because they're man-made, they're not real. They can't save you. They can't love you back like the Redeemer does and says he will. Now, we like building and making things. Young boy likes to go to his bedroom and build a green Lego castle and say, I did that. It's mine. Look at it. Look what I did. A young lady before prom likes to create her own dress. And she says, look what I did. This is mine. A woman likes to bake her kid her own birthday cake and claim that I created this. A guy builds his own house. Now, if he builds that and he doesn't like the product, guess what? No harm, no foul. It's his creation. He can redesign it in his image after his likeness and the way he wants. The kid can break down the green castle and make a red castle. The young lady can take a little out of her dress, put some sequencing on one side, and that would be it. The mother that bakes a cake and doesn't like it would probably go to Hen House and get a Tippins pie and call it good. The man can extend closets. Why? Because it's our creation. We made it. It's after our likeness. And the Bible does this in quite beautiful satire. If you've ever read Isaiah, chapter 40 through 44, he brings this up repeatedly about the stupidity of going after idols because they're fake. And he says, I want you to think, this is Isaiah, I want you to think of a farmer that goes off in the woods and he chops down a tree. He brings it back to his farmstead. He splits the tree in two. One half he begins to cord out for wood, for fuel for his house. He brings that wood in, puts it into the hearth. And it warms his house, it cooks his meals, it does its intention. With the other half of that split wood from the same tree in the same forest, he carves an idol. He puts eyes on it, he paints it, he puts it on his mantle, looks at it, and he believes that it has supernatural power. It's his lucky charm, whatever you want to call it. He prays to it. He believes that it's befriended him. And Isaiah says he's a moron. Because what he doesn't realize is that same piece of wood that he's carved out, the other half is an ash heap in his furnace. It has no power at all because it's not real. He can talk to it all, it won't talk back. And that is the fallacy of idols. Idols will never redeem you like your God will. Idols will never love you like our God will. Why? Because they don't exist. They're not real. They're fabricated. I've been reading the last few years, and I admit that I am a Johnny-come-lately with technology. My son and daughter can run circles around me when it comes to technology. I'm now at the point in my life, if I have a glitch, I just sit here, fix it, because they can do it and then they roll their eyes at me. But I've been reading several new journals about, or several journal articles about people between the ages of 18 to 26 that are having relationship difficulty. From what I gather, they just don't want to take the time to be in relationships because it's messy and they're introverts and so they're weirdos. And so they have developed this AI, these characters where they can decide their hair color, what gender they are, what they're wearing, and they create these AI and they put them on their phone, they put them on their monitor, they put them on their computer screen, and they come home after a long day and they talk to them, and this little cartoon talks back with them. And a whole relationship is created. And I read this and said, my oh my. Someone needs to seriously get a hold of these pathetic people and realize they're not in a real relationship. I mean, their cartoon can't love them back. Their cartoon cannot hurt with them. This is the whole AI controversy. An idol, by definition, cannot talk to you. An idol cannot redeem you. An idol cannot be jealous to love you and no one else. And this is the mistake you see of Israel with the golden calf experience. Stephen talks about that in his sermon in Acts 7. Here's the line that Dr. Luke writes about Stephen in his speech. At that time, they, that's Israel, made an idol in the form of a golden calf, and they brought a sacrifice to the idol. And here is the line, and they began to rejoice and praise because of the work of their own hands. That's an idol. You made it, you designed it to be served and to be worshiped, but they're fake. They're not real. Which sets us apart from the God that we love, who said, or Paul said about him unmistakably in Acts 17, that our God is not made by human hands as if he needed anything from man, but he himself is the one who gives life to all. Man was created out of the dust of the earth by God, not vice versa. And have you ever noticed, beloved, and it's not an accident, it is deliberate, particularly in the New Testament, as well as the Old, but particularly in the New Testament, when God begins, or the apostles begin to evangelize pagans entrenched in idol worship, every single time the way they introduce God is God the Creator. God's the one who makes things. He's not the one who's made. He doesn't need you to become more God. That's the fundamental difference between God and the idol. And this brings me to my last principle. Idols will never be jealous for your love like God will, because they have been fabricated. That's the first principle. Let me add to it with the second one. They've been fabricated in our image, after our likeness, to do our bidding, thus rejecting our God. This is exactly how verse 5 says. Notice the definition and the explanation of why God punishes idolaters. Responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children to the third and fourth generation of those who do what? Of those who reject me. That's what God thinks about idolaters. They have created, verse 4, for themselves graven images, likenesses for themselves. They've made it to be served and to be worshiped, and thus they have rejected me. Idol worship is the ultimate rejection of God. Just go read Romans 1. A created idol is something that is here and not there. Something you can pick up and move and cover. But our God is not here and not there. He's everywhere and cannot be picked up and moved and put in the closet or covered or painted over or dusted. And that is the difference. It is a repudiation of God. Thus the command in the verse 4 expands with image and likeness. And I would like to close on that because that, I think, is an age-old problem that we are infected with in an idolatrous culture. And redeemed people who are enticed to be worshipers of idols. There is a difference here in verse 4 and verse 5 with idols to what God is again. Not only are they made and He's not only are they here in a graven image and God is everywhere, but in the real enticement. People, and I'm no different, like to see things. Imagine in a few hours, as I'm sure you'll join me in turning on a football game and not being able to see it. By definition, an idol has its allure and its power because mankind sees it. But how has God been thus described in Exodus? He has been described in two and only two ways. He has been described in darkness with clouds and smoke, and He has been described as unapproachable light. Two opposite images, but packing the same issue, meaning God's majesty is so great and glorious that no mortal man can see Him. So how do we know He exists in Exodus? Because God's people hear Him. They listen to His word. Idols are seen but not heard. God is heard but not seen. And this is a spin-off of the garden, isn't it? What is the reverberating line in Genesis 1? And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God said, and it was so. And God said, and it was good. And He comes to man in the cool of the day and talks with him and says, "Don't you eat that fruit." And how did the mask of the great deceiver deceive Eve? With the eyes. Look at it. It looks so good. So we have this age-old problem. Here is our God that cannot be seen, but His word is vibrant and living, and we respond to His words. Idols can't talk, can't love, can't redeem, but they entice us with their allure because we've created them in our image, after our likeness, to do our bidding, thus rejecting the God of the Word. And if you don't believe me, let's turn to Exodus 32 to see it. We'll get there, but I want you to see how this plays out by the same redeemed people sitting at this same mountain, receiving this same law, just a few weeks later will now violate the second commandment they've received. So I'll be skipping around. I would encourage you to read the whole chapter. I mean, it fits together like a glove with this, but let me just call attention what the point I'm trying to make here with 32. Beginning in verse 1, when the people saw, right off the gate, they're looking at their eyes and they see that Moses is not here. We don't see God. We don't see Yahweh. Moses is gone now. We don't see anybody. So what do these wizards of smart do? Give us a God that we can see. So they gather Aaron and they say, "Get up and make gods that will go before us." So stupid. What a bunch of dolts. Gods can't do that. They're fabricated, but they really believe that. And it gets worse. Verse 4. He accepted the gold from them, fashioned it with an engraved tool, and made a molten calf. And then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." By the way, they say it again, or God says it rather, in verse 8. The same quote, "These are the gods, O Israel, who brought you from the land of Egypt." God is saying what Israel is saying. So let me get this straight. They take man-made jewelry, they throw it in a furnace, and out pops a golden calf. By the way, that's not an accident. Out pops a golden calf, created in their image, after their own likeness. They can't see their God. They can't see Moses. They see this, and then they make this huge leap. That's the God that's redeemed us. So they have fulfilled the principle I just had before. They have now rejected their one and only Redeemer, the only one that will ever save them, the only one that will love them with a jealous love, the only one that will not share them with anyone else. They've rejected that outright. Now they're searching for Bigfoot, believing, oh, he really exists. He's out there. We know. These are the gods that redeemed us. Are you kidding me? A man-made golden calf? Are you serious? It's no wonder then that later, verse 25 tells us that pagan nations are saying these people are fools. They've lost their witness to the world, you see. They're no longer separate. And then I would call your attention, we won't read this, but for sake of time, start in verse 33 and read the rest of the chapter, how God feels about this. This will disturb you, but in accordance to what he said in the second commandment, God now says, I'm going to wipe them out. I'm so peeved. How they could reject me. How they could, the temerity to say that cow redeemed them. And I'm done. I'm starting anew. I'm going to wipe them out, annihilate them, and start afresh. And it takes Moses to sort of negotiate. We'll get all there. But that's how ticked he is. That's what he thinks about worship. He is ready, willing, and able to wipe them off the map and start afresh. He doesn't need them to be God. He'll start with the new people. The rocks can cry out. And the point is, that's how passionate he is to be worshiped correctly. So, a little humility check. Don't think that God is bound because of what we do to still bless us. He's bound to his promises of obedience and his covenant promises of love for us. I remember, and by the way, this issue of sight is prevalent in our culture. I teach high school students. You all know that. It is my absolute delight to do so. I've learned a lot about being a pastor probably the last 3 years doing it. They've taught me a lot. But there are some moments with them I'm prayerful. I regularly see a chiropractor. About every 3 weeks I see my chiropractor, just so that I'm not the Tin Man. And I tell my chiropractor, who's my age, Dr. J, you're going to have job security because I've met these teenagers and these people in their 20s. In about 20 years, they're going to come in for neck injury because they're always doing this everywhere they go. I will ask my students every semester as I get to know them several questions. My students make fun of me and some of them call the Albertian questions. And it's more getting to know questions. And one of them is, what is your favorite book? I'd like to know what they read. When I first started, it was pretty prolific, and I had maybe 4 students say, well, I don't read. I have a class of 40 high school students. This semester, when I asked the question, 28 of the 40 say, I don't have a favorite book. I don't read. Well, okay. Let's solve. And number one, I doubt that. I mean, you got to study for English tests, so you clearly are literate. But what do you do to stimulate your mind? And they will be on TikTok, and they will be on stories for 3-4 hours a day that last 20 seconds a pop. They won't be able to tell you in 4 days what they watched. But that's our culture, a sight culture. And so Neil Postman knew exactly what he was doing when he titled his best-selling book, We Are Amusing Ourselves to Death. I read once of 2 men stuck in an insane asylum. They both were patients in this insane asylum, and one believed he was Napoleon, and he kept running around, I am Napoleon, I am Napoleon, I am Napoleon. And the other, his inmate, said, who told you you were Napoleon? And he said, well, God did. To which the inmate replied, no, I didn't. That is our culture, right? Voltaire said, God made man in his own image, and then man returned the favor. That's idolatry. I am God. I create things in my image after my likeness. It has some sort of power over my life. And in thus doing, we reject God. As we leave today, I have good news for us. This redeeming God, jealous that he would share you with no one else, in a special love that deities cannot duplicate, does provide us an image of himself to see and behold. And I would like to introduce you to that image, if you would turn with me to Colossians chapter 1. That culture, by the way, prevalent in idols. Colossae, there was a statue of a god worshipped on every street corner. So when you go home today and go through stoplights, count how many stoplights you go through. Chances are that's how many gods were in downtown Colossae, as in downtown Athens, as in downtown Corinth. They were everywhere, which is, by the way, why the Romans persecuted Christians. Because the Romans in the 1st and 2nd century, and 3rd, by the way, up until Constantine, said that Christians were unpatriotic to Rome. Christians were accused of burning the flag, not standing for the national anthem. Okay. Christians were accused of being unpatriotic to Rome. You know why? Because they worshipped only one God. Who does that? Said the Romans. We've got gods for everything, and a Christian refuses to worship these gods. They're not of Rome, and so they were persecuted for it. Well, we're introduced by Paul in Colossians 1 to the image that God provides his people. You want to see God? Here you go. Beginning in verse 12. We should give thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. He delivered us from the power of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption. There's that redeeming language, and love mixed together, the forgiveness of his sins. Now, let me pause here. Have you experienced that? God help the heathen. Has anyone experienced verse 12 and 13 today sitting here? Okay, thank God not everyone's going to hell in this room. I mean, if you just linger on isn't this sweet and beautiful to our souls? This is what Paul is doing. Thank God that we were in the darkness, now we're in the light. That he's redeemed us and loved us. And then he begins to introduce who this was. Verse 15. He, that is the Son, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For all things in heaven and on earth were created in him, all things whether visible or invisible, whether thrones or dominions, whether principalities or powers, all things were created through him and for him. He, that's again Jesus, is before all things, and all things are held together in him. He is the head of the body, the church, as well as the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself might become first, that's first in prominence, in all things. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in the Son, and through him to reconcile all things to himself by making peace through the blood of the cross, through him, whether things on earth or things in heaven. Jesus Christ is the image of God. Jesus said, if you've seen me to his disciples, you've seen the Father. I and my Father are one. And isn't that just like our God? Mortals who could not see God, God then comes to mortals so that we can see him through the God-man Jesus. I was a student for 6 years. You sent me there to Southern Seminary in Louisville to do my PhD work, and there I got to know, again, I got to reunite with Dr. Al Mohler. Dr. Mohler, when I started off in ministry, the pastor of the church I was at was a trustee that hired Dr. Mohler. And so Dr. Mohler came to our church about 6 times. I picked him up from the airport, took him. This would have been in 1993. And 20 years later, he knew me. The guy's got a phenomenal memory. He knew not only, he remembered me, my name, he remembered what steakhouse I took him to. Not long after he began to serve as president at Southern Seminary, Dr. Mohler received a phone call from a troubled visitor on campus. This gentleman had been through the campus center, which is gorgeous, and told Dr. Mohler that there was an idol at Southern Seminary, which was of obvious concern to the president, and he left his office to go find the idol. And he found it. It was in the exact place he'd been told. An idol, a carved image, immediately recognizable for what it was. On display, full display, behind glass, in the campus center of Southern Seminary, a Baptist school, mind you, as part of the missions collection that had been brought back from a distant nation. So immediately, Dr. Mohler recognized the quandary. This had been brought back by those who meant to contrast the worship of the one true living God over such empty and vain idols. But the problem was it was displayed without any explanation. So Dr. Mohler did what he felt his responsibility it was to do. He found out how to get into the display, not knowing exactly what one does when one finds an idol on one's campus. He put it behind the display so no one would see it. Then he went home that night, prayed about how to handle the particular problem later, the next day. When he walked through the center the next day, the idol was back on full display. So he repeated the procedure of jimmying through the display, moving it out where no one could see it, and it would turn up again on full display. So Dr. Mohler found out that he was at war over idols with the Southern housekeeping staff. They were wondering who was vandalizing the display, and he was ready to become Oliver Cromwell and take matters into his own hands. Now, I can safely tell you that particular idol, because I know all about that story, is gone. The problem is other idols crop up, and maybe not carved images. Idols that compete for our love, for our affection. I'll close with a line from William Cooper, the author of There Is a Fountain Filled with Blood. He wrote a song called Oh, for a Closer Walk with Thee. By the way, he wrote this song after he came out of convalescence for his 3rd attempt of suicide. The dearest idol I have known, whatever that idol be, dear God, help me tear it from thy throne and worship only thee. Father, I thank you for your watch care over us. I thank you that in your word you clearly reveal yourself of how you think and the passions and desires you have. We thank you that you're a jealous God who will not share us with anyone else. We thank you that you're a jealous God and your glory you will not give to anyone else. We thank you that you're a jealous God, that you saved a particular people for a particular reason. And so guard us, protect us, fight with your power against over every man-made idol that vies for our love and service, tempts us to reject you, the fountain of living water. This I pray in the sweet name of Jesus our Lord, and for his sake, amen.